Transforming your life with hypnotherapy just got easier with your host, Julie from CoachingHypnosis.net.
Welcome back, dear listener, to Coaching Hypnosis. Yesterday, we took a monumental trip to the Supreme Court to unpack Rock versus Arkansas, establishing a citizen's fundamental constitutional right to own and testify to their own subconscious memory. Today, we're moving away from the legal precedent and walking directly into the living room of an ordinary, middle-upper-class American family in Great Neck, New York. We are looking at a case captured in real time on home videos where aggressive, unscientific interrogation didn't just alter a legal outcome, it acted like an invisible chemical weapon, completely dissolving the memory ledger of an entire community, turning brothers against each other and splitting a family into absolute psychological fragments. Today, we break down the profound clinical and investigative lessons of the Friedman family case, famously spotlighted in the documentary Capturing the Friedmans. Now, let's establish our baseline reality check for today. Most people think that to create a false memory or a state of intense hypnotic suggestibility, you need a professional setting. You think you need a clinical office, a leather recliner, and an expert operator deliberately invoking a formal trance induction. But as elite human performance and strategic operators, we know a deeper, colder truth. The brain does not require a formal induction to enter a highly suggestible, uncritical state. If you trap a young child or anxious witness in a high-stress environment, surround them with intense authority figures, and subject them to relentless emotional manipulation and leading narrative loops, their nervous system will naturally freeze. Their critical gatekeeper drops offline to survive the immediate threat. They slip into a highly compliant waking trance state. In this state, the boundaries of reality blur. Today, we decode how poor investigative techniques perfectly replicate the catastrophic architecture of bad hypnotic regression. To understand how the Friedman family fell into absolute psychological abyss, we have to look back to Thanksgiving week in 1987. Arnold Freeman was a highly respected, award-winning high school science teacher who ran computer programming classes for local neighborhood boys out of the basement of his family home. His youngest son, Jesse Friedman, who was just 18 at the time, frequently helped out. The police intercepted a package of illicit materials sent to Arnold, which triggered a raid on the home. This was a definitive objective crime, but under standard investigative execution, a professional team follows the physical evidence where it leads. Instead, the local police and investigators, caught up in the boiling cultural fervour of the late 1980s moral panic, assumed that a hidden, massive criminal ring must be operating right beneath the surface. Investigators began calling in the young boys who had attended the basement computer class over the years. Initially, the data was entirely clean. The boys explicitly told investigators that nothing ever happened in that basement. They played computer games, ate snacks, and went home. But look at the absolute sarcastic and harrowing absurdity of how the state's pipeline responded. The investigators didn't accept the data because it didn't match their preconceived horror script. So they began running coercive, hours-long interrogation sessions that perfectly mirrored a textbook corrupt hypnotic regression loop. Stage 1. The emotional disorientation loop. Isolate vulnerable minors away from their parents, drowning their nervous systems in acute anxiety, guilt, and the terrifying weight of police authority. Stage 2. Coercive suggestive paintbrush. Refuse to accept neutral data, explicitly feeding the subject specific scenarios and rewarding them with release only when they validate the state script. Stage 3. The manufactured reality shift. The subject's brain completely replaces their genuine history with a vividly rehearsed coerced fantasy creating a permanent, tragic psychological fracture. The investigators didn't ask open-ended questions. They used heavy compliance pacing. They told the children, "We know what happened in that basement. Your friends already told us everything, and you're going to get in trouble if you lie to us." When a child's brain is flooded with that level of cortisol and fear, it looks for an immediate escape hatch. If the investigator continuously implies a specific narrative, the child's imagination steps in to paint the scene. Over weeks of repeated sessions, the children began remembering wild, increasingly impossible scenarios. The narrative shifted from basic interactions to elaborate, bizarre rituals involving hundreds of victims, backrooms, and weapons. Scenarios that were entirely physically impossible based on the layout and timeline of that small suburban basement. The kids weren't intentionally lying, my friends. Their brains had literally processed a coercive interrogation as a pseudo-hypnotic regression, permanently overwriting their original memory data track with a completely synthetic reality. As strategic clinical hypnotists, we must look past the complex family dynamics captured in the home videos to analyze the precise cognitive contamination that occurred. The Friedman case study remains one of the most definitive examples of how high-pressure suggestion completely destroys the integrity of human recall, the compliance to confabulation pipeline. In a clinical setting, if an unethical hypnotist repeatedly tells a client they must have been abused in a past life, the client eventually confabulates a memory to satisfy the guide. The police interrogation ran the exact same code. The children quickly learned that the only way to gain validation, stop the pressure, and be allowed to leave the room was to agree with the state's dark script, the destruction of the group mindset. Because the entire neighborhood of Great Neck was subjected to this viral narrative leak simultaneously, a collective confirmation bias took hold. Parents began looking at their children's ordinary behavior through a distorted lens, magnifying basic childhood anxieties into definitive signs of trauma. The social fabric of community entered a shared trance of hypervigilance, the erasure of personal source monitoring. When Jesse Friedman was repeatedly told by his attorneys, his family, and the state that the evidence against him was mountain high and that his own memory of innocence was just denial, his own self-trust fractured. Under the systemic weight, an individual will actually begin to doubt their own eyes, choosing to capitulate to a false ledger just to achieve an end to the psychological warfare. Arnold and Jesse Friedman ultimately pled guilty in a desperate bid to avoid life sentences under a legal system locked in absolute tunnel vision. Arnold died in prison. Jesse served 13 years in a maximum security facility before being released, spending decades launching massive legal appeals to clear his name. Independent reviews later concluded that the investigative techniques used on the children were so profoundly coercive and psychologically contaminated that the resulting testimonies were completely worthless from a scientific and empirical standpoint. It stands as a stark monument to the fact that when you manipulate the subconscious through force, you don't discover secrets, you write a tragedy. The profound, heavy lesson of the Friedman case study was a visceral reminder that your self-trust, your memories, and the objective truth of your own history are your most valuable sacred assets, and the absolute moment you allow external panics, coercive groupthink, or loud, authoritative systems to tell you that your own clear, conscious logic is wrong, you are letting them rewrite your code. Any environment, culture, or advisor that demands you to doubt your own fundamental reality, ignore your boundaries, or buy into a narrative of brokenness to appease a collective is running a deeply toxic script. You must remain the absolute unassailable guardian of your own truth. True, Unshakable leadership is about sovereign self-trust, knowing how to anchor your nervous system against collective hysteria, protect your cognitive boundaries from outside pollution, and execute your vision from a position of absolute independent clarity. If you've realized that you're navigating the high-intensity execution of your business by letting outside voices, market panic, or the aggressive conditioning of critics override your internal authority, wasting your immense strategic focus on manufactured self-doubt, feeling paralyzed because an external script is telling you how you should feel, or letting an exhausting autopilot routine run your life, it is time to step out of the suggestion matrix and reclaim your strategic composure. If you're ready to clear that cognitive pollution, ground your identity in undeniable present self-trust, and lead your business with a sharp, sovereign, and completely unburdened mind, I invite you to book your free 40-minute clarity call. Together, we'll dismantle the external conditioning, stabilize your nervous system, and install a powerful, unshakable subconscious identity focused entirely on your true present sovereign authority. Remember, aligned subconscious plus healed history equals unshakable leadership. Thank you for listening. Align your mind, visualize your future, grow your business. Mindfully yours, Julie.